Okay, welcome everybody to the Wednesday, September 20th, 2023 meeting of the Planning Commission. Mr. Trainer, would you like to call roll?
Ms. Friedlander?
Here.
Mr. Krasner?
I'm here.
Mr. Stevens?
Here.
Mr. Puentes?
Here.
And Ms. Comont?
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Mr. Hyra said that he will be here, just somewhat late this evening, so we'll anticipate his presence a little bit later. So nothing, no changes that I have on the agenda. It's pretty much consistent with what's there. Does anybody have any comments or questions on the agenda? Seeing none, would somebody like to recommend a motion?
Chairman, I'll move we adopt the agenda as it was prepared.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. We have an agenda. Okay, we do not have a speaker this evening, so at this point, we can see if we have any public speakers. Mr. Trainer.
We have one registered speaker for a work session item.
You typically wouldn't take comments during a work session, so
Yeah,
yeah,
I
you
think-
can go ahead and take it now.
I think right now is it.
Okay. Then we have John Ward here to speak on the Community Energy Action Draft Plan.
Welcome.
Thank you for your time. John Ward, 335 Riley Street, and I'm speaking tonight as a member of the Falls Church Climate Action Network. Members of that group did send in a letter, I think yesterday. I think it made it into your package of materials for tonight, so thank you, Mr. Trainer, for moving that along on short notice. You may not get a lot of comments on this tonight over the next couple of weeks, but I hope you don't take that as a sign of a lack of interest amongst the public on the topic of climate change. This plan only came out like a week ago, within the past week, and it is I think the city staff has done a wonderful job of making it accessible and readable for a lot of technical content that's in there, but there is a lot under the hood. So if you only, for the general members of the public who only saw it within the past week, there's a lot to drill down into if they wanted to make comments. So I think we try to do that with some of our members, a group or ad hoc group that we have in the letter that was sent. I have read the staff report, and it does, or when you got this evening, and it does seem like it does speak to many of the issues, or all the issues, I think, that were raised in a previous presentation, raised by the commission during previous briefings, so that's good. I would like to point out one quick thing. In the staff report around line 32, it says that the community has met its 2020 goals for greenhouse gas reductions, being down by 20% from 2005 to 2020. And it cites that we're doing a cleaner electrical grid and fewer miles driven per capita, less energy use per household, things like that. What I will point out, though, is that as of 2018, we were only down about 2% from 2005. That last 20% drop, we made our goal, but that last 20% drop was in 2020, due almost entirely to the COVID shutdowns. So I think we think a lot of that work from home aspects will stick around, here to stay, but emissions are rebounding back up. So there's hard work still to do. So I just like to, as you listen to the presentations here tonight on what the city can do to help its residents and businesses reduce their carbon footprint, just keep that aspect in mind. Would be great. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
That's all the speakers we have.
That's all we have. Okay. Well, very good. Let us move on to our action items, which is comprised of accepting our minutes. So the first set of minutes is from August the 16th. Does anyone have any questions or edits to those minutes?
I did. Sorry, not the August 16th. Sorry, the September 6th minutes.
I have one on the next one too. But
Okay, maybe the same.
But you're okay with this one?
Yeah, I'll move that we approve the minutes for August 16th.
Okay, is there a second? Second, Mr. Puentes. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All
Aye.
those opposed, say no. Okay, we have minutes.
Abstain.
Oh, okay, one abstention. Commissioner Friedlander. Okay, moving on to the minutes of September the 6th. Commissioner Coman?
My change was that the agenda was adopted unanimously 6-0. I think it's written 4-0 maybe.
For the agenda, for adopting the agenda, yeah. And I also had a comment, it has us down for a 25-minute break, and I think it was only 10 minutes. So I might want to adjust that. So, any comments, edits? Is there a motion to adopt those minutes?
I move we adopt the minutes from the meeting of September 6th as amended.
Okay, Commissioner Comand on that. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Commissioner Friedlander. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. Okay, we have minutes as amended for September the 6th. All right, at this point, let's move into the two work session items that we have. And these are just a work session, so nothing that the commission will be voting on this evening. So the first item is, and I'll invite Mr. Young to come to the podium, it is the Community Energy Action Plan. And we had a preliminary discussion of this item in July, but that was prior to having the draft plan, which was just Thursday. So, we've had our first look at that. So this evening's discussion will have the benefit of that. Mr. Stoddard, did you have any preliminary comments that you wanted to make?
Just a brief setup for this item. As you noted, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, you had reviewed sort of an early presentation of some of these materials and some of these ideas during a work session at your July 19 meeting this year, and you had provided direction to staff as part of that work session. That feedback has been incorporated into the plan, as well as feedback from other community groups, boards and commissions. Today is end of September here, September 20th, where you can get to review the draft plan and provide comment on that. This is scheduled to come back to you for your action, which would be a recommendation to council during your October 18th meeting in just under a month from today. And just to set the scope of this, of course, this is set up as an action plan. It's in the title. And it's an action plan that would deliver on already adopted community goals. So this is a direction that the council and the community have made clear that they want to go in. And so this action plan is really laying out the roadmap for the tools in the box that need to be used to get there. But with that, I'll turn it over to Andy Young.
Thank you, Mr. Stoddard. Chair, Commissioners, appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you all again this evening. So following up on our meeting in July, as Paul's talking about, we've got a draft plan for feedback from you and others in our community, and so wanted to walk through some elements of that for you real quickly this evening. So, Jack, if we can. So, first of all, I think with me this evening, virtually, I've got a couple members of our consultant team, Susan Elliott and Fiona Wissell. So they're going to help me with the presentation here. I'll kick things off, and then they'll help us walk through some of the modeling and emissions estimates and talk you through a little bit of kind of how we came up with what we're proposing. So as a quick recap, the community has set some greenhouse gas emission reduction goals of 50% below 2005 levels by 2030 and 80% by 2050. As we look at kind of where emissions have gone, and Mr. Ward's comments earlier, I think, help frame this, but you could see 2005 through 2020 what the emissions inventory for the city looks like. 89% of that comes from transportation and buildings, and so the plan we've presented to you all today focuses on those areas. I think some of the feedback is what do we do? What do we focus on? And that's part of the idea with the plan that we've put together. There are other things that contribute, but the joke I tell is, why do people rob banks? It's because that's where the money is. This is where the emissions are for us and where we need to focus. So, we've done quite a bit of kind of community engagement and outreach. We had a town hall at Meridian High School back in April. Made the circuit with various boards and commissions through the late spring and early summer. We had a virtual town hall after we spoke with you all back in July. And as we talked about, the draft report was released last week. So with that, we've got these high-level emission reduction goals. How do we translate those into actionable things that we can work on here as a community? And so to kind of talk through the elements of that we've put together, I'm going to turn it over to Fiona to walk you through kind of what we've come up with.
Thanks, Andy. So I think we can jump to the next slide to kick this off. So I'm going to talk to you the next 3 slides kind of in a row, and they're all focused on the assumptions and results from the emission reduction pathway modeling conducted for this report. So I'll walk through them, and then we can pause and go back if there are any questions that you all have on these couple slides. And the purpose of this part of the discussion is to show what it will take for the city to reach its emission reduction goals. So how many vehicles need to be electric or how many homes need to be electrified. And then Andy will then walk through the remaining slides, which show the details of each strategy and outline actions the city can take to help the community reach the level of participation and action to meet the targets shown here. So the targets here cover kind of the main sectors that Andy just talked about, buildings and transportation. The last one is also related to clean electricity. So the first one here is that by 2030, we're modeling a target of a 20% reduction in passenger car vehicle miles traveled. This aligns with the most aggressive assumption for VMT reduction from the regional modeling completed by MWCOG. It will require greater action than just the city can provide. For example, getting residents to utilize public transportation options like metro and buses more heavily. But improvements to bike safety and walkability within the city will also reduce start and stop trips, or trips that start within the city and end within the city, and hopefully shift those to walking, biking, or other car-free options. So the second target here is around transportation electrification, so it shift to electric vehicles. And we modeled an aggressive assumption based on the California Clean Car Rules. So this assumes that half of all passenger vehicle purchases are electric in 2030, and that by 2035, all vehicles purchased are electric for passenger cars. The third strategy focuses on existing buildings, so reducing energy consumption and emissions through efficiency and electrification. The key modeling assumptions here include building envelope improvements and an end-of-life electrification assumptions for heating and air conditioning, and then hot water and cooking equipment. And what does this mean? End-of-life electrification assumption. So basically, when equipment or appliances reach the end of their useful life, we assume the replacements are highly efficient and mostly electric. This new electric equipment is not necessarily cost effective and will require the use of federal tax credits or additional incentives to make those replacement options cost effective for people. So the actions related to this strategy are focused on how the city can target residents and businesses as they make those equipment replacement decisions and help them understand federal tax credit benefits in the process of selecting something like a heat pump or electric appliance instead of a gas furnace or a gas stovetop. So just to put a little numbers around those, what we're saying here to reach that 13% reduction in energy use by 2030 is that 200 to 300 air source heat pumps need to be installed annually. 150 to 200 electrified water heaters need to be installed annually. And each year, 60 homes need to complete whole home efficiency improvements. And that's defined as insulation, window replacements, and other building envelope improvements that reduce or increase home energy efficiency about 15 to 30%. So those are very aggressive assumptions. Not everyone is going to immediately think to put in an air source heat pump or an electric water heater or do a massive building envelope retrofit. So that's really what the city is going to be targeting with the actions for this strategy, kind of helping people make that decision and giving them the information they need to really think that through and to recognize that those are viable options, especially given federal tax credits. So the fourth strategy here focuses on new buildings. We don't have any specific targets for them included in the modeling, but the strategy does focus on actions to encourage efficient electric and overall low carbon new development in the city. And then finally, the fifth strategy for the targets here is focused on rooftop solar adoption within the city, with a target of 5% of residential homes installing rooftop solar by 2030. And that is up from about 1.5% today. So that is a significant jump over the next 5 to 6 years to get to 2030. And that assumption also increases to 20% of residential homes by 2050. So that requires about 25 to 30 homes each year to install rooftop solar. Andy, next slide. So the result of all of those targets and assumptions are shown here in this wedge chart. And you can see at the very top, the gray color is the transportation result. So the VMT reduction is that 20% assumption, and the aggressive vehicle electrification assumption comprise about 20 to 25% of the overall reductions achieved by 2050. You can then see the buildings wedge, which is the dark blue, followed by the rooftop solar wedge, which is the light blue, and finally the VCEA, which is the Virginia Clean Economy Act requirement for Dominion and electric utilities in the state to decarbonize their electricity supply by 2050. And that does comprise the majority of emissions for these strategies, given how much electrification is happening in the transportation and building space in the modeling. Powering that with clean electricity drives the majority of these reductions. And then finally, the last wedge here at the bottom is the gray wedge for additional actions. These are other activities and other actions that will be needed to meet the city's goal. So that dotted line kind of going across, you can see the 2030 target for the 50% reduction. And then at the bottom, the green dotted line is the 80% target by 2050. So the assumptions we just talked through don't quite reach the goal. So there is a gap for both 2030 and 2050. And Andy, if we can jump to the next slide, I'm just going to talk about what that gap is and how it could be met. So by 2030, you can kind of see here what's remaining in the city for emissions largely comes from on-road transportation and then building electricity and building stationary fuels consumption or natural gas. However, by 2050, you can see the on-road transportation bar is much smaller and the building electricity bar is also much smaller. So the assumptions and targets we're modeling for electrification of transportation and building rooftop solar and then the VCEA targets for Dominion have a huge impact by 2050 for reducing emissions within the city. But by 2030, there's just not enough runway for them to really have a significant impact. So for example, only so many homes and businesses will undergo renovations over the next 5 to 6 years. And only so many people will be purchasing cars in that same time frame. So there's just not enough equipment turnover to really see significant reductions by 2030. But these strategies are still very aggressive. So by 2050, once you kind of get that on-ramp to these strategies, you're reaching that 100% purchase rate for electric vehicles. You're finally turning over more and more homes for gas furnaces to heat pumps. We're finally seeing that reduction over time. The one place that we don't see that significant reduction is stationary fuel consumption in buildings by 2050. Despite the aggressive efficiency and electrification assumptions for buildings, there is still significant natural gas use in a lot of residential and commercial businesses. There are plenty of opportunities to reduce that. One of the major ones is utilizing low carbon fuels such as renewable natural gas or hydrogen. And Washington Gas already has goals to decarbonize its gas supply in the region to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So if Washington Gas meets its goals, that stationary fuels dark blue wedge in 2050 will be mostly taken care of without the city having to take significant action or residents having to take steps that are not cost effective to fully electrify or reduce carbon emissions from their buildings. And then kind of the other pieces that could obviously change this would be significant changes in emerging technology or changes in state and federal policy that allow the city or the state to kind of push technologies and push more funding into these spaces to see greater transformational change in the buildings and transportation sectors. And then, of course, there's the waste sector. There are other kind of emission pieces here that we haven't addressed specifically in this plan, but the city is undergoing efforts to tackle municipal solid waste. So there are kind of parallel paths here to address some of these other actions, even though they're not laid out specifically in this modeling. So I'm going to pause here and happy to take any questions before we kind of move away from this modeling discussion.
I think you can go ahead.
All right, next slide for Jack. One more. Thank you, Fiona. All right, so to kind of, for each of the strategies that Fiona highlighted, we've come up with a series of recommended actions that kind of tie to what's going on here in the city of Falls Church, right? And things we heard from our community input sessions and things we think might help us, reach some of these goals. So The first one is on car-free alternatives, and to make a 20% reduction in passenger car use in the city is a pretty big goal. You got to do a lot of different things. No one solution actually gets you there. So we've tried to cover that with, I think a number of recommendations that we heard from the community, and so walking through them real quickly. Increasing bike safety. We tried to reinforce the language on that I think we discussed last time. The good news is we're working on the bike master plan for that right now. Promoting and expanding public transit. So let's do a better job of making sure people here in the city know the transit that's already here. Look at shuttle collaboration opportunities, things like that. In the all-in solution, looking at golf carts, scooters, and what the city can do to promote and encourage residents to take on some of those forms of transportation. And then a nod to, the good pedestrian travel work that the city's working on and, continues to need to focus on going forward. So, so for car-free alternatives, that's what we've got for that. Next slide. Supporting the shift to electric vehicles. So 50% of new passenger vehicle purchases by being EV by 2030 is a big goal, right? At the end of 2022, there were 155 electric vehicles in the city and 119 plug-in electric hybrid vehicles. So we've got a ways to go. So want to continue to try and help educate people. We want to look at potential personal property tax incentives that can be used to help encourage people to make that decision to shift to an electric vehicle. And then the big one, and I think the primary focus is expanding access to charging, both for public charging as well as kind of working with our multifamily and mixed-use buildings here in the city to provide more charging options to residents and customers. Next slide. Existing building efficiency and electrification. So continuing the theme of helping inform and educate and provide resources to folks. So some of those are, that's a recommendation we've got on a couple of these, and it's, things like, website information and the like, but we've also had some good discussions about how do we use our building safety team and the process by which some of these projects and opportunities come in and the city engages. I think we had a good discussion on that last time I was here. So we're looking to kind of fold some ideas in to help in that arena. Energy audits, I think Mr. Stevens brought this one up last time. I think that's important. Some building owners are like, I know I need to do something. I'm not sure what to do. This is a way to help them with that. We have a commercial real estate tax exemption on the books. It hasn't been used a lot in the last 10 years. Let's look at revamping that to focus on energy retrofits of our commercial building stock. And then finally, one of probably the priority item, I think a really good opportunity for us in this category is to focus on building improvements for the low and middle income housing here in the city. There are a number of resources out there that will pay for this stuff, weatherization of homes, Energy Star appliances. I think even Dominion's got a new program for rooftop solar, but it becomes a challenge connecting those programs with the owners of these buildings and the residents in them, and take some focus. So I think what we're proposing is, we're not that big a city, let's make a list and start working through it and see how we can collaborate and get some of these things done. Next slide. So number 4 is focused on new development, right? And I think this one's near and dear to your all's kind of scope, but looking at updating the special exception criteria for sustainability elements, looking at zoning changes to increase density. We've got a green home program here in the city, but we haven't used it much in a while, and in fact, the code has kind of caught up with our requirements for that program. So I think we've got some ideas on how we can look at passive house and other more cutting edge kind of efficiency models and how we might encourage some of that development here in the city. And then continuing to advocate for state code enhancements. All right, last one for our strategies, number 5. Next slide, Jack. Rooftop solar. So again, the one-stop shop, how do we help people making these decisions? We have a solar tax exemption on the books. You haven't really used it. let's look at doing that, and how can we accelerate it to make it enticing for homeowners to make this investment. And then I think kind of longer down the road, as programs mature, well, let's look at, ways to help finance these kinds of investments, the commercial property assessed clean energy, for example, green banks. And then, something that's relatively new, but I think we probably have an opportunity for here in the city is community solar projects. You have a building with a nice roof. They're not interested in putting solar on it, but a bunch of residents in apartment buildings or homes with lots of trees do want it. There's a way to kind of do a community level project to maybe pull those people together. Next slide, please. So the last one's, how do we kind of hold ourselves accountable moving forward, right? So we talked about transportation emissions and the calculations of that, I think, before, but we need to look at kind of, do we need a more appropriate model for the City of Falls Church? One of the suggestions I think we got from the community is we have a property assessment, database where we collect information on homes when we assess property values. How do we make sure we're capturing some of these relevant, building systems so that we can have a better understanding of what's going on in the city? Then we need to publish an annual update and then look at tying this energy plan back to the comprehensive plan. So with that, I think that's the last one. Oh, okay. So it's a whole bunch of stuff. What do we focus on first, right? And so we talked a little bit about the quote one-stop shop for providing information and helping folks. I think that's something that we can get started on pretty quickly. Talked about how we leverage the building safety team. Right now, there's a lot of stuff going on in the city, and that team's got a lot on their plate, so we've got to kind of be sensitive to that. But looking at how we might pilot some office hours with that staff to help residents and businesses with questions. Incorporate protected bike lanes in the bicycle master plan. That's ongoing now, so we'll continue to monitor that progress. I think in the EV arena, it's how do we help some of these multifamily buildings figure this out, where they get power, what requirements they got to follow, to put charging on their properties. The low to medium income building improvements campaign that I talked about, I think we ought to put together a plan for that this year. Engage the ESC on input on the special exception criteria changes. Look at the comprehensive plan. Develop an annual report. And then I think, as staff, we've got some homework to do on these 3 potential property tax incentive ideas. And so we would kind of use this next kind of, assuming that's what the community directs us to do, we'd kind of do some homework on that and come back to council next year, you all, with some options and proposals on how that might work. So with that, I think I'm done. And welcome any questions. Happy to answer any questions, comments, or concerns you have. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, and to Fiona for the presentation. I think it's our turn now to provide you some input as you further refine the draft. And I think do you have a date yet when this gets presented to City Council for the first time?
So we changed that today. So it was going to go October 2nd. It is now going October 16th.
Okay, so you've got some time to think about whatever comments that we might make or that you may get from
Yes,
the
sir.
public, and to incorporate that before you make your presentation to City Council.
Yep.
So, okay, well, let me open it up to my colleagues for any comments or questions, whatever, that you might have. Would anybody like to go first? Mr. Puentes?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks for all the work. It's really great stuff. It's very encouraging to see. I think there's a lot of ambition in here, which is great. I'm going to focus just a little bit on the first strategy on transportation. I know there's a lot that we put into the EV box and the potential for EVs to have a big dent here. And the pathway chart, maybe I should have asked this before in the modeling piece. The pathway chart shows big benefit from the electrification piece, not so much from the VMT reduction piece. It seemed to be kind of static after a couple of years, which kind of surprised me. I mean, I think if we're if people aren't driving, there's no emissions. So it seems like a good way to achieve some of these goals. So maybe it's that we're not putting enough strategy, enough emphasis on the VMT reduction piece. There's really good language in here and good strategies about boosting other modes and making and improving bike infrastructure and transit and all that. But I think we probably should do more to disincentivize driving. We don't say anything really about making it more difficult for people to drive. As long as it's easy and cheap for people to drive, that's how they're going to get around. So I think there are some strategies here around road diets, parking minimums. I know that's baked into some of the zoning pieces. Those could be put into this piece. Taxes on big vehicles. There's a lot of communities like DC is doing this now, vehicles that are 6,000 pounds or more. I know there's a lot of these proliferating throughout the city. That would not just help with emissions, but to your point, if people don't feel safe walking and biking, maybe because these big giant cars are driving around, but the disincentive for driving, I think, should be a big piece of this, if possible. I do like the one-stop shop for the electrification piece. I think there's an opportunity to do that for the TDM side as well. In Arlington, I think that they pin a lot of their strategies around educating the public around options for driving. So again, I don't know exactly what goes into the one-stop shop, but helping people find other modes, get around would be, I think, good bang for the buck. And I had something else and I can't find where I put it. That's it for now, but it's really great stuff. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We can come back if you recall what that was. Commissioner Friedlander, do you have any comments you'd like to make
No, not at this time.
at this time?
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Krasner?
I mean, overall, like I said, I think it's, again, there's a lot of work that's gone into this, and we have some folks on the commission that I think are, have a better in-depth knowledge of some of the, when it comes, especially on transportation and on green energy. But, I mean, like I said before, I was glad to see that you incorporated, I think I at least was one of the people that talked about, I think we have to have a multi-pronged strategy, as far as looking at the big projects. But also, I think I mentioned the fact that, and it's reflected in there, so much of what happens in the city is by right development, and that interaction that you have, even, through an administrative by right process with builders, whether it's commercial or residential, to encourage that choice, whether it's the fuel choice, from gas versus electric. Because once a new house is built, you're kind of locked in for, at least 10 to 15 or 20 years on the fuel choice once they've selected a gas furnace versus a heat pump or the hot water heater or the other appliances. And so, whatever we can do to both encourage that, and again, I don't know as far as the actual incentives, but even just, again, promoting that at the time building plan review, I think is worthwhile. So I was glad to see that reflected in here. But yeah, overall, it's I think, again, you're kind of preaching to the choir with this group, I think. So certainly, I think, I don't want to presuppose too much, but I think in general, this lines up very well with a lot of the initiatives and statements we've made on various projects that we've seen and on other comp plan pieces we've looked at as far as promoting green building and looking at all of these issues. And so the fact that the city's tackling it in this concerted way, I think it's long overdue. And I'm glad to see us, actually putting our money where our mouth is to, bring you on, a consultant on, and do this. So overall, I think you're on the right track. I mean, as far as feedback for me, I see this moving along the right track, and I like I said, the multi-pronged strategy, because it is something that, again, requires us to look at, big things, small things, in order to make an impact. So I think it's good work, and I like where this is going.
Great. Okay, thank you. Commissioner Coman.
I would agree with my colleagues. I think this is a really great start on the draft, and I also really like the multi-pronged strategy that you've laid out, and a lot of creative thinking about, we really need to think outside of the box of, how can golf carts or the use of golf carts contribute to our energy goals. So I'm glad that you put those in there. Thank you for the the sort of simple order of magnitude measures, both in cost and impact. I thought that those were helpful to me. I do agree with some of the comments from FCCAN. If these are short-term, goals that we have, like, let's actually put some real numbers to them so the community can have a discussion. I know those will change over time, and it may not be easy to predict, but if they're obtainable, I think that would be good. I also would agree with their comments, and I copy and pasted the section of the plan that talks about how, we can expect to see a 30% reduction by 2030 and 65 by 2050, but we're not going to reach our goals. And I was like, well, how will we reach our goals? Like can we, and I understand the complexities of that and what might be missing from that gap, but I really would just like us to think ambitiously about, this is, if you believe that climate change is happening and is a problem, like we really need to think about the hard decisions that we need to make to address it. So what more can we do? Is there more that we can do in the building area? 13% reduction doesn't strike me as that much. And related to that, I wondered about things like shade, reflective roof materials. Like there's a lot of things with the way buildings are constructed that might help to reduce the energy needs of the actual building. Those might be things that could apply to individual residential buildings too. So I'd love to see more of those incorporated. Trees are really not mentioned in the plan, and again, thinking about it from a shade perspective, like that's also a potential energy reduction, and so I'd like to see those. I think that's also sort of community value here in Falls Church. I think some of the public comment you received, is related to trees. I think people sort of expect to see them in the plan. I understand that the environmental chapter is, about like climate resiliency, and we talk a lot more about trees in our canopy there, and in terms of, their impact on our climate resilience. But and energy is kind of a different thing, but I still think like, incorporating trees in the plan, they do play a role, at least in providing shade, potentially. On the measurement thing, I think that's an excellent idea. I really love the idea of having a sense of the systems that people have in their houses. I'd also love it if we could kind of measure our heat islands in the city, where those are occurring, and what we can do as a community to reduce them. The other ideas. Okay, so I think it's bold, to suggest some of the changes to zoning. I would support those suggestions for increased density. I do think that you can really get some economies of scale by putting people and the things that they need in closer proximity. I think there's probably some energy savings for, just people sharing walls, whether that's a duplex or triplex or quad. I'm assuming that's the case. I don't know how big of an impact it is, but assuming that's the case. I agree with Mr. Puentes that, and one other thing on that, I think there were some comments about, let's limit those recommendations to like our transportation corridors. And I guess I would say like, well, those are already like our really high density areas, and the whole city is only 2 square miles. I don't think anybody lives farther than like a 10-minute walk to 29 or 7 or some other, area. So I would say that you could apply these to the community as a whole. That's my own view on that question. I agree with Mr. Puentes about incorporating parking requirements in here. They do play a role. That is, if you're requiring parking to be created, then there will be, you're sort of creating that's induced demand, right? You're creating this space for cars to fill, and so people will bring their cars and fill it. And so the more parking we have, the more easy it is for people to drive, and the more driving we're going to get. So as we are building these future buildings that are going to be here for another 50, 75 years, like we need to really think hard about what we're asking for. Obviously, we need to be realistic about where we are now, but it's a balance, right? It's not, so I would think about how we want to approach that issue as well. I also support the idea of the scaled taxes on larger vehicles. I think that is an interesting incentive. Anything that we can do financially to incentivize people's behavior, whether that's in a positive way, to get them to make these investments in reducing their energy, or in a negative way to get them to think more carefully about how they're choices impact our community energy usage, I think those are a good thing, and those are the levers that our government has to use. So as much as our council is willing to take a look at that, I think that, you know, we should do that. So all of the suggestions for the tax incentives for solar, all of the home appliances, EVs, like, I think those are all great ideas. I really love the community ideas, community shuttle, likely not a fixed route, but I am willing to revisit the shuttle idea as long as it's not the George going on its sad little route, but is, you know, maybe like a more forward-thinking way of like how the community can access a maybe not fixed route shuttle. And I, as a person who cannot put solar because I have too much shade and trees, tree cover, like I'd love to be able to tap into a community solar project. So I do think giving people options at the community level is a really good idea. I also want to mention that I saw a cool video of there was a company that's created these like public EV charging from light poles. So there are these little things that drop down, and so you just install it on any light pole that has a light, and it's right on the street. So, you know, those are the kinds of creative solutions that I think we need to be looking at as a community, and I don't think they're huge investments, but they can really go a long way to getting people to adopt these new technologies. And I will, one other thing I would just say, I think the education element is super important. We just had our hot water heater go out. I would have loved to replace it with an electric hot water heater. We ended up with gas because I would have had to like upgrade our electric, like, you know, capability in our house, and I didn't know, you know, we had no hot water, so like I wanted it to be fixed like right then. So now I have a gas-powered hot water heater for the next, you know, 10 years. So, you know, telling residents like, okay, if you want to do these things, these are the things you have to do. I know FC Can held a really excellent event on that kind of education. I think office hours is a great idea, but also just creating materials that we can hand out to the community would be super, super helpful. If you want to get to rooftop solar, you need to do A, B, and C and make it as simple as possible, just so people who are curious about it can get a sense of what's involved and then, you know, learn more. The other thing, sorry, I'm not this long, but the last thing I want to mention is the waste reduction. I just feel like there could be a bigger emphasis on that in the plan, composting and just waste reduction overall. I know that's a small part, again, maybe similar to trees, but another thing I think that the community thinks about when they think about our energy use. And so, yeah, that's it for me. But thank you for all of these great ideas and putting this together.
Very good. Commissioner Hyra.
I don't know what I could add to all of the comments that have come from people that know a lot more about energy efficiency and environmental change, climate change than I do. But I just wanted to say a couple things. And, you know, one, Annie, I'm so glad that you're here and you're doing this and that we have galvanized enough support to bring in someone like you to look at this energy action plan. So to lay out the plan is a signal to our town and our community that we really care about this. But I think that we have to go the next step, and the next step is implementing some of the things that you outlined and the priorities. And many of the priorities or many of the strategies are relying on the goodwill of other people, as opposed to us putting money behind the execution of the plan. Now, I know with some of the tax incentives that you're thinking about, that'll cost us some money that we won't bring in because we're giving people tax breaks, and that's great. But I think we should also be thinking about carving out a % of our budget. If this is a real priority, our annual budget should have a fund, that's our Energy Action Fund, that then we are going out and executing and implementing part of this. So, you know, that's something that might have been buried in there that I missed. But I think, you know, again, when we have these priorities, doing a plan is nice, but you got to execute on the plan. And we do a lot of plans in this town, and so do a lot of cities. But many of these plans don't get executed. So can we start thinking, and I know that's a council decision about, and maybe this is a recommendation that gets put into this, is an actual fund, an annual fund that is not based on a tax break. It is based on hard dollars that we are already bringing in taxes, that then we allocate back out to the community to do and implement what you've outlined for us. So that is just something that I wanted to put on the table, because it takes dollars, and we have dollars. It's just, are we willing to allocate the dollars to being more energy efficient? So that's it, but thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I do have a list of kind of suggestions and thoughts. I'll start out, first of all, with some kind of high-level conclusions that I drew from having read through the plan. And that is, having an approved plan, I think, is an important step to bring some focus on reducing emissions. I think up till now, the city has had little programmatic effort to do that, and I think this plan will give an opportunity to start to have a series of programs to reduce emissions. I think by having an approved plan, we'll encourage passage of budget amendments to implement actions, and also to persuade developers to increase their efforts to design buildings with much lower emissions, which I think is one of many reasons why it's important to include the Community Energy Action Plan and the Comprehensive Plan. And I'll just add that Arlington did that about 10 years ago, so we're kind of catching up. Going through the draft plan, I think it demonstrates that reaching our goals is going to be very difficult and require many actions. And that limiting focus to just a few top actions, as much as we would like to do that, because that's a little bit more efficient, it would nonetheless leave very large gaps in remaining emissions, and I think the report does a very good job in pointing that out. I think the challenge that we have at the local level in Virginia is that we have to rely on voluntary actions to get anything done under a Dillon rule state. So contrast this with the state. When they adopted the Virginia Clean Economy Act, Dominion did not have a voluntary option to do that. They had to do it. Whereas in the city, we have to go for voluntary actions, and that means that we have to ask for budget dollars, and that's rarely a popular thing to do. But that's what we're left with. Okay, some areas where I think where the report may need some more detail. The one-stop shop concept for education and support. It's got some support here from several of the commissioners, and I would agree, but I think it needs more details. What would such a shop look like? Which jurisdictions have successfully developed them so that we can have something to leverage against? Maybe some general idea of how much they would cost and whether or not there'd be organizational policy changes so that we get cooperation from across different organizations. So the question is, how do we get information to people before they've made a decision to change an appliance? This is the point that Commissioner Krasner made, and I think it's a good point. So I think it's been a discussion that I've participated in on whether we need to have a program similar to what we have for tree contractors, where they've gone through and been approved by the city. I'm just, as a thought, could we approve HVAC contractors that have undergone training for the need for electrification? So that better advice is given to customers before that final decision of gas versus electric is made. So I like the proposal to establish a pilot program for community solar. That was item 5.4, but I think it needs a bit more detail on what it would cost to develop and manage such a program so that there's something that can be brought to the city council for them to chew on. Some areas where I think we need more information. We talked about the icons a little bit, and I agree they're helpful, but I think they could benefit from some additional definition. Right now, we have the leaf and we have the dollar sign, but it's not real clear just what those mean. So maybe putting a little bit of metric around that I think would help. Might be interesting for ICF to help us understand why CPACE hasn't worked in jurisdictions that have passed these ordinances. And maybe at a minimum, we should wait until the state passes a state program for small jurisdictions. I think that's still underway, as I understand it. The recommendation 6.1, revised transportation emissions calculation, is confusing. I read through that multiple times and still don't know quite what it's saying, and I don't think I was alone in that, and talking to some other folks. So, I mean, I get that COG's greenhouse gas inventory approach does not measure pass-through traffic, but my understanding is this is true for all jurisdictions, so that greenhouse gas emissions for pass-through traffic get picked up in the inventory of the jurisdiction where pass-through traffic originates. So, for example, for emissions from pass-through traffic in Falls Church for cars originating in Fairfax County, the Fairfax County greenhouse gas inventory would pick those up, so that overall for the region, we're whole as far as picking those emissions up. So if we tried to do something in the city to estimate those pass-through emissions and deduct it, we'd be kind of doing a double counting there. So, and I may just be confusing this, but the more important point is that I think that 6.1 could be rewritten for clarification. One problem does occur to me, though, with this, and that is right now we get allocated a pro rata portion of the BMT from Fairfax County. So presumably that reflects their mix of electric vehicles and internal combustion engines as opposed to what we have here in the city. So that if we were to spend money trying to promote better adoption rate for electric vehicles, it wouldn't show up necessarily in our greenhouse gas inventory report. So that may be an issue that our doing a separate analysis of would make sense. So areas where a different emphasis might be helpful. We talked about the fact that we don't get all the way there, that basically we're focusing on a 30% reduction by 2030 as opposed to a 50%, and I think it was 65% in 2050 as opposed to an 80%. So I'd suggest that a bit more attention is needed on the additional actions needed to reach the city's goals. That section in the draft was very sparse. And I think the term aspirational was used, and I'm a little concerned about that because it might give an excuse for not trying to reach those goals. And my understanding is those goals reflected the United Nations scientifically based percentages that were needed to avoid the worst of climate change. So they weren't kind of plucked from from thin air. They're scientifically based goals. So yeah, they may be very hard to reach. And that should be acknowledged. But I think if they're the right goals of what we need to get to where we need to be, then I think they should be there. Renewable natural gas. I'm kind of maybe we could benefit from a little footnoting or something from ICF on that. When I last heard that, when I was involved with the environmental committees at the Council of Governments, this was not a very well-received concept. There's not much of it, and it's very expensive to produce, but that was 5 years ago, so maybe just some additional updates from ICF would be helpful to make that more justifiable. I know that most environmental groups do not look at renewable natural gas with a very sanguine outlook. So given the low penetration of rooftop solar, I think your numbers showed 5% by 2030, and I thought I'd picked up 10% from somewhere. So to me, this indicates that community solar should really be given high prominence. You did mention that in your report, and I appreciate that. This would require more focus on advocacy for state legislation because the current legislation gives Dominion the right to charge rates so high that nobody wants to take advantage of the existing community solar. So I think working with neighboring jurisdictions would be an important part of our plan to try to get that state code improved. Working with other jurisdictions on a better state building code would also be, I think, very desirable. I know it's in there, but I think it only got one leaf, and so that may be something where some additional emphasis would benefit. We talked about higher density has better results for emissions. I might suggest that that needs to be linked to projects that are built using transportation-oriented development principles so that car trips are reduced. I guess the thought is if you put density in places where people are not close to transit, then that will generate more car trips, and therefore we won't necessarily get reduced emissions from that density. There may be other benefits and needs for improving density, but it may not be a positive one for emissions unless it's connected to TOD. And Mr. Puentes, I'm sure will correct me if I'm misunderstanding that. Finally, just a few thoughts on some things that could be added. I think success of the plan is really going to require ongoing oversight by City Council. When I was involved with the ESC, I think the issue of emissions reduction came up about once every 5 years to City Council, and that's just not going to be enough for action to take place. So I think one thought I've heard, and it makes sense to me, is to pick out some metrics and recommend that it be included in City Council's work plan. So for example, things like the number of PV installations, maybe the EVs that have been purchased. You had referenced earlier the number of heat pumps that have been installed. Just a few key metrics like that, and just have those included in the city council work plan so it comes up for review and gets constant emphasis to staff. I think might be something to consider. Maybe adding an autonomous shuttle at West Falls Church at that project, similar to what is being used at Mosaic. It strikes me that would make it easier for residents to connect ultimately into bus rapid transit when that finally gets operating. And then the last item I have is that since most electric vehicles cost more than internal combustion vehicles, they're going to generate a lot more personal property tax. And so it may be that this difference could be used to justify and help fund incentives for EV purchases that wouldn't have a negative effect on city revenues. So that's all I had. Overall, though, I'd say keep at it, and I look forward to the final product. Are there any final comments from our commissioners before we close this out? I'll just give you an opportunity, Mr. Young, if you have any final comments, or Mr. Stoddard.
No, I appreciate everybody's feedback and suggestions, and we'll keep at it and be back to see you all hopefully here in a month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to ICF as well. Okay, I think we can move on to our other workshop item, which is the Quinn Homestretch application. And Mr. Stoddard, I'll ask if you would like to introduce this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the commission, I'll make a brief introduction before I turn it over to our case planner and then to the applicant team. But this is before you tonight as a work session item. This is a follow-up to the session you previously hosted with all the boards and commissions at your September 6th meeting. There you received a complete presentation on the proposed application from the applicant team, so I would suggest tonight you maybe skip the application and go right into the discussion. Boards and commissions provided some brief comments at that September 6th meeting, and now each of those boards and commissions is doing their detailed review during their meetings. So the purpose for you all tonight is set up to be your work session with the applicant. They've got their full team here. On your schedule looking ahead, October 18th is when you're scheduled to hold a public hearing and make your recommendations back to council. And of course, between tonight's work session and that hearing on the 18th, we would expect that the applicant team will provide slip sheets explaining how they're going to respond and incorporate the feedback from you all as well as other boards and commissions. But with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Arsenault, if there's any sort of a staff introduction, and then to the applicant team.
It's up to you. I have something prepared, but we can just go right into it if you...
No, go ahead.
Okay, I'll just give a brief, much more brief than last time, I promise. But I'm here tonight to present a brief summary of the second submission of the Quinn Homestretch redevelopment proposal received on June 9th. The proposal includes a new 10-story mixed-use building with a maximum height of 115 feet. A description of the location begins on line 85 of the report. The 1.86-acre site is comprised of 3 existing parcels located at 350 and 360 South Washington Street and 303 South Maple Avenue. There are 3 land use legislative actions actions by City Council required for the proposal, and they start on line 104 of the report. 1 is a comprehensive plan amendment to change the future land use map designation of Lot 27 from business to mixed use. The second is a special exception to allow residential use within a mixed-use development. And the third is a special exception to allow an increase in building height from a maximum of 75 feet up to 115 feet. Updates on the application, as Mr. Stoddard mentioned, begin on line 47 of the report. The second submission of the application was received on June 9th, and with this submission, the applicant adjusted the area for each use, modified the building shape, and moved the building closer to Maple Avenue. The applicant also provided a shadow study, a shared parking analysis, and a draft parking management plan, in addition to a landscaping plan. The applicant provided revised voluntary concessions dated August 3rd, and the only change was to the affordable dwelling contribution from a one-time contribution of $1.7 million to a one-time contribution of $1.9 million, or to allow 2 city residents to pay 60% AMI rent through the city's residents' full tenancy within the building. Council formally referred this application to the Planning Commission and other boards and commissions during its August 7th, 2023 meeting. and their comments and concerns are outlined on line 17 of the report. Staff has completed the submission, and as mentioned during the Planning Commission meeting on September 6th, these are staff's recommendations for further review. 1, to revise the ground floor commercial layout. 2, to activate South Maple Avenue streetscape. 3, to address the proposed 115-foot building height bonus conformance with further revisions to the architectural articulation of elevations, building setbacks, and heights along South Maple. 4, to clarify shadow studies. 5, to consider relocation of the loading area. 6, to address how the proposed mixed-use project and site is within the core commercial area of the small area plan. 7, to review the affordable housing component. 8, to research sanitary sewer connections. 9, to review parking supply and management. 10, to clarify the green building certification bonding method. And 11, to include universal design background. As mentioned, Planning Commission and Boards and Commissions joint workshop was held on September 6, 2023. Representatives from several boards and commissions were present and offered comments on the height of the proposed building, affordable housing, environment, ADA accessible space, proposed parking reduction, and activation of Maple Avenue, among others. The comprehensive plan analysis starts on line 203 of the report. The future land use map of this area was last reviewed in 2005, and the retail, office, and residential market has changed substantially since the adoption of the current comprehensive plan recommendations. Staff notes that this change includes new developments with multifamily residential units, and that the new proposal includes ground floor retail on the site and will update the commercial space to Class A standards. The proposal further includes new medical office space, specialized residential use, and senior living human care housing, as well as providing over 40,000 square feet of updated public amenity open space, outdoor community space, an amphitheater, public rooftop amenities, and a landscape pedestrian promenade. Further, staff has reviewed the special exception primary and secondary review criteria and finds the proposal is generally aligned with these criteria. I'll skip over the fiscal impact, but it starts on line 770 of the report and remains unchanged. As for timing and scheduling moving forward, as Mr. Stoddard mentioned, begins on line 779 of the staff report. A second submission was received on June 9th, and council held a second work session on July 10th along with a site visit. Council had a first reading and referred the applications on August 7th. Staff is requesting comments from boards and commissions on the second submission by Friday, October 13th. Staff is anticipating a third submission this fall, followed by a city council work session, minor revisions, and council final consideration and action in winter of 2023 or 24. The next step for the Planning Commission would be to hold a subsequent work session or make a recommendation to council. Next, the applicant will brief you on their proposal, followed by discussion. Thanks. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Mr. Painter, did you have any kind of overall comments you'd like to make?
Just in the interest of time, Mr. Chairman, I know we spent about an hour and a half, 2 hours last time just talking about this about 2 weeks ago. So I'm not sure. I'm happy to go back through the same presentation, but I think we had all, heard it before. But our entire project team is here this evening. We have been working on changes that we heard at the last work session for boards and commissions. And so we do hope to have some things to unveil to you at the public hearing in October. But again, our entire project team is here to answer any questions. They're also available online as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, I guess it's our turn. Would any of the commissioners like to proceed with some comments or questions? Commissioner Hyra? He raised his hand, so.
Barely. I just said.
Doesn't take much.
So, I think I just have two questions, and really they're just, I guess, conversation pieces. I mean, I'm not hard set on the comments I'm going to make or have a position, but I do just have questions. And one, Mr. Payne, I think you brought this up last time. It was that a lot of buildings going up now are just residential. The commercial environment is really tough and difficult. And you mentioned that what makes this stand out is that you're still going forward with a lot of commercial uses. And I just would love to kind of hear about that because, we got the Kensington that's, similar. it's retail, or it struggles. I mean, they've got the art thing going on, but that's different than the restaurant or the coffee shop or whatever you want to call it, and that didn't do very well. And I'm just wondering, and also knowing this part of the city, we got the Target going out, and so I think this deal will do very well on the residential side, and everybody will make a lot of money and will provide a really good service for people that want to move into the city. But will the commercial really work? And I do worry about having a building like Founders that sat for a very long time without its commercial. And do we want that to be replicated in another part of the city? So I would really like to hear the evidence that you're utilizing to know that the commercial is really going to work, and it's going to work for the development, it's going to work for the residents, it's going to work for the surrounding residents, it's going to work for the city. Because when we think about these deals, we're thinking about, well, commercial might work in this building, but it might take away from the viability of other commercial that's already established. I don't know if that will, but I just see the commercial is struggling so much in this city, in this region, and around the nation. So what is the magical thing that's going to happen here? All right, so that was just one. The second thing, and actually I do have I guess a stronger stance on this, is with the affordable housing. So I can see that initially one proposal was put forth to basically cut a check. And then I don't know when this came up. I mean, I presume city staff asked you to look at the options of providing units within the building. I know we like to have that happen. And I also know from the comments that were sent in, there were some people that voiced real strong opinions about having residential affordable within this building. But I would just say that I don't think it makes sense to have it in the building, right? Because this is a different building. This is a long-term, treatment in a sense. I don't think we're in the business of providing health care for people with our housing. And so to go from like 1.9 million, which I think could go to maybe buy 2 quads across the street in Virginia Village, that would be 8 families or 8 units, seems like a much better deal for our city than to provide 2 affordable units within the building. And again, I don't know if you could tell me a little bit more about who asked for that and why did they ask for that? Because it just doesn't seem to make sense for me. Because again, I think we're in the business of trying to get affordable housing and the maximum amount of affordable housing somewhere placed in our city, and to have it go to 2 or from 8 to 2, and then also providing basically health care for people doesn't seem to make sense to me. But apparently it really makes sense for some people because a lot of people seem to be advocating for this. But I would just put down the stance that we should just strike out that recommendation to have 2 units within. We shouldn't even have that be going on to council. I would recommend that to our planning commission as we discuss this and debate this. But I would love to hear a little bit more about what brought on the insertion of having 2 units for the lifetime be in this building as opposed to just cutting the $1.9 million check. Those are my only 2 comments.
Okay. So I think I'll take the affordable housing one first. That was a request by housing staff that we accommodated. Initially it was 1.75 million with the money being dedicated towards purchasing quads at Virginia Village. When we ran the numbers, it was based upon a certain percentage of the units at 60% AMI for a period of 30 years. When we increased the number of units in the building, we also increased the amount to 1.9. We made sure that staff and the applicant were looking at apples to apples, that city staff agreed with the numbers as well as the third-party consultant. During those discussions, that's when housing staff came to us and said, if we're going to do units in the building, we would like it to be 2 units, and so we were accommodating it. And that's what the revised voluntary concession shows. I think that we are somewhat agnostic to it internally. Just to, I think we agree with your position that that money could be used for a variety of other things. It doesn't even have to be just used for purchasing units. It could be used for first-time homebuyer programs to help people build equity and put down payments for new homes. It could be enrolled for a number of different uses. So, but that was something that we agreed to with city management staff and with housing staff, and that's what's reflected in the voluntary concessions. With respect to the amount of commercial, so we do have our commercial broker who was not able to be here this evening. We're having that shop take a look at not only the amount of retail, the amount of restaurant, but also the location of it, because that's also been something that's been raised by economic development staff is when you have it facing sort of this central green, is it really going to work, right? And also, city economic development staff is going to be having their third-party consultant, as I understand it, take a look at it and evaluate the sufficiency of it, critique it, and the like. And I hope that our broker and the city's consultant can meet and talk about it. Just as a reiteration, there's 32,000 square feet approximately of medical office uses on the second floor of the building. And this is actually a use that's called out in the comprehensive plan as something that the city could potentially target, just given its location between Inova Fairfax and Virginia Hospital Center, and the 14 tenant-owned buildings at Merrifield that are next to Inova Fairfax that are just teeming with people, and there's a major need for medical office. So we do believe that medical office is appropriate, especially given the population that's going to be living in the 5 stories potentially above this. But it's an unmet need in the city. And at a point in time when office is definitely a distressed asset class, medical office seems to be something that really could work. In terms of retail and restaurant uses, we're proposing about 13,000 square feet of retail and about 4,800 square feet of restaurant. We're still messing around with those numbers. What we're trying to do is to right-size it to the market. Our discussions with economic development staff, though, is that there is a real need for retail space, ground floor space in the city. I can't speak to Founders Row anecdotally. My understanding is that there were certain deals in place that fell through for a movie theater, for a large 10,000 square foot brew pub, and then the pandemic hit, and as a result, for a number of years, those spaces sat vacant until very recently, and it's been very difficult for that owner to ink deals, but it's worked. But the city economic development staff tells us at least that there is a real need for ground floor retail space. I don't think any of us want to have a repeat of what occurred at Founders Row, but hopefully a global pandemic is not going to occur as well. We will be warm lighting these. That was a request from council, from the vice mayor. That is something that we will be accommodating as well to hopefully entice people to come to the space. And then I would also say, too, that where it's located on the central green, eventually there will be buildings, hopefully redeveloped buildings on the other sides of that green, the triangle. And so that this area really does become a hub in and of itself. It feeds on itself. It's not exactly analogous to Mosaic District where you have where Matchbox is and Kirby Club and those other restaurants that are right along that green. They're not immediately adjacent to a street. You can still see it when you drive into Mosaic, but you will be able to see it at least from South Maple Avenue. And when we have wayfinding signage, fully accessible streetscapes and sidewalks around it, hopefully it will entice people to come in and it will all work. The other thing we are looking at, too, is the location of the Tinner Hill space. Right now, that's on South Maple Avenue. It's right next to a restaurant space, so we're looking at also shifting that, which was a recommendation from council at first reading. Or before the first reading, so that we're putting more retail space on Maple Avenue. So streetscape activation was a big issue on South Maple, as was the loading dock location and what that looks like, whether it's embellished, whether it stays the same way. But the idea is to have as much retail fronting along Maple Avenue to activate that streetscape, and then reduce the amount to the extent possible fronting on the green. But even in that area that fronts on the green, for the reasons I stated, I think it will work. But I think at the public hearing we can make sure that our retail consultant's there too.
Thank you. And next time you run past my house, I'll have a thing of Gatorade for you because
7:30 a.m.
Yeah, I see him
every morning,
almost every day.
Okay. Any other comments? Sure. Commissioner Krasner, please.
Sure. I mean, actually, some of the comments, Mr. Hyra hit on some of the things. I share his concern about the viability of the retail, without street frontage. So I'd be interested to hear what your broker, your commercial broker has to say about that. Obviously, that's a kind of individual that would have a probably better sense than me, but I would say that, we've seen similarly situated spaces really have a hard time, pandemic or not. And so I share that concern that, we might be unlikely to get really good viable retail in, the way that's set up. Like big picture, I share some of the concerns. I heard some of the comments that at the last boards and commissions about just the overall massing and relationship of this to what's around it, especially on the Virginia Village side. I would hate to see, Virginia Village, we put a lot into, as far as in the importance of it from an affordable housing standpoint, but, we don't want to lose sight of the fact that, the quality of life for those residents that live there and having, such a tall building across. I mean, I feel like, if this was being proposed across from, let's say, properties that were assessed at a higher level, I don't know, I think we might be hearing people scream a little louder about that. And I don't want to, lose sight of that because I think it's important, that relationship. I did see the graphic that tries to compare it to other projects along Maple, and look and compare, in relationship to the grade, and I get that, but as far as from a relative standpoint, at this site, it's tall. And I think that I think there might be better ways to try to step back and address that, to make sure that it's not, it's obviously, it's casting a shadow certain times of the year, pretty significant shadow to the north. So that's a concern I had. Getting down to maybe like smaller details, the loading dock, on Maple. I know there have been other projects where we've been able to get that internal. I mean, Founders Row had other problems, but the loading dock is essentially completely internal to the site as opposed to fronting. I know that on Maple, I guess I was looking at it, and there's the loading dock for the other project, also on Maple, and I guess I've seen versions where as long as the door's closed when they're not using it, it doesn't look terrible. But sometimes buildings have a habit of when they show us the pretty pictures, the door's closed, but most of the time the door's open and you're looking at dumpsters and we all know it's in a loading dock. So anyhow, I don't know, there was a way to get that not fronting on the street. I think also, again, right across from Virginia Village, I think that would be also a positive thing. I know there was some reference as far as in response to some of the concerns about the 05 plan. The 05 plan, obviously, it's getting a little long in the tooth. The comp plan, obviously it guides us, but, it predates the SE criteria. And so, I think we need to be careful about hanging our hat on that. Things have changed a lot in nearly 20 years, and we're not, it is our plan, and it's on us to, keep it current. But, and I would just say, that stood out to me when that kind of, rationale was made that, that was justification for it. I think it needs to work in the site. And I understand, the pitch for the extra height, but I think it needs to work. So, and I have a little bit of concerns at this point. I'm not saying it can't work and that the SE, is not approvable for the extra height, but it needs to work. And right now it seems a little bit like the massing is not in scale with some of the adjacent properties. That's all I had at this point.
Okay. Commissioner Friedlander?
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to thank you for the updated drawings that we saw during your last presentation. I think there were some really great positives with the green roof design. It would be great to kind of find a way to bring more of that down, to maybe step back some of the massing that you do see along Maple. I do have concerns about the overall height because of, I'm going to echo a lot of the comments that Commissioner Krasner did bring up, just due to the proximity to those residential units right across the street. You also, in the perspectives, it makes it really hard to kind of see, with the change in the grade, what that really does to those homes. But I think also in those perspectives, it's important to show the surrounding context that you're going to see beyond, right? Because the perspective views look like we're at the beach. And we know that there's a lot more trees, there's a lot more buildings that kind of go down that street. But I think you've done, you've started some good work at starting to reduce that mass and break up those facades, but I think it still needs to be a little bit more developed in that way in order for it not to feel like a big wall, especially along Maple. I would like to see the retail, of course, come back out on Maple to kind of activate that sidewalk a little bit more and start to link down. But again, I also have concerns that have already been voiced more than a few times on this commission, in that area itself is kind of retail challenged, and I wonder why that is. If there's studies that need to be done to kind of understand, because I look at Chinner Hill and Pearson Square, and there's still empty storefronts in Pearson Square as well, and so I wonder if we can't get a commitment by a certain percentage of signings in the special, before construction can start, then maybe it makes sense. I don't know if you've investigated the idea of like a partnership program with the senior living facility and the schools or something, and have classrooms or something that the seniors can still use on their own for something that they like to do, but at no charge to them because it's kind of wrapped into the fees. But also you get that cross-generational pollination of interests that I think there could be some opportunity there for after-school programs. You are in a close proximity to a school, not quite walking distance, but almost walking distance. And that I think that there might be some opportunity there with music programs or, art programs, or, you could even bring the Tinner Hill Association into that and have some music studios or something. I'm not quite sure what form it would take, but I think we might have to rethink that whole idea of retail. I feel like we've got a glut of empty retail spaces, and there might be a better way to think about it differently, that if we can't get retail to commit, then let's figure out some other programs that might be able to use that space and be more community driven to bring those pedestrians in and kind of activate that space and activate that awesome garden and courtyard that you've created. Like, I really think that you've spent a lot of time in putting together that experience that I think it would be a shame if it goes unused, because there's no pedestrians down there. Some other things that I was thinking about, aside of disrupting the massing, more than just a variation of color and materials, really like just breaking up the massing of those elevations, I think will help a lot in the overall perception of where it meets the street and how it faces the adjacent properties. I talked about the step backs from Maple, and maybe the decks can wrap around those corners a little bit. And we heard some comments from the Architectural Advisory Board that also kind of addressed that the corner doesn't quite work. And I think he was more focused of the pedestrian level, but I was thinking the corners all the way around as you go up, because that will also help kind of break up that mass as you go up. I had some concerns also about the loading dock and how that parking lot actually works. I don't know if there's opportunity to do a drive-through similar to how Harris Teeter has a drive-through, so you don't have those trucks backing up, because that door is always going to be open. It's actually shown closed on those drawings. Let's see, and the entry is set back off of Washington a little bit, and I think it needs a little bit more prominence somehow so that you know where you are and that you've arrived. And I don't know if that also ties into how the bus stop works. I was looking at the site plans to kind of understand where that bus stop was, and it's not tremendously clear. But I also feel like there needs to be a better passenger drop-off at that front entry. I know you're challenged because you have faces on all sides. So I think there's some opportunity there to really evaluate how do mobility challenged people get in? How do people get dropped off to either go to a class or go to the medical office building or to visit friends who live there, or to the rooftop garden, rooftop amenity that is that available for the public? So, you know, like how do we make that more intuitive? And also the flow of that and how the traffic works within that, because I think you have to go into the parking garage right now as it's drawn, and I think, you know, as you're morphing where the retail and with the restaurant kind of facing the courtyard or the garden, I think going into that garage, there's no way to actually, you have to do like a 3-point turn to get out. It would be good if you did have a drive-through, and that could also help with the loading dock. Let's see, and then the sewer shed. So this ties back to, I see that you've offered to do a study of the impact on the sewer main, but I wonder, and this is also a question for staff, is where does that study actually stop, and how far would that work go? Because I don't know if we've got a capacity study for this area, but I think we talked about it in our last meeting, was to have a sewer shed, have the city engineer do a capacity study, because as we're adding these large density projects, what is that doing to our existing infrastructure in the city? And if we have to upgrade down there, what does that do to the rest of our system within the city of Falls Church, and how do we get that to either Arlington or Fairfax? So I'd like to see the special exception address that, and how it actually gets, if we have to upgrade all the way through the city, not just the main in a certain location, because then we're just pushing the problem literally down the street. So that is a concern of mine. I did want to mention the sustainability requirements and the electric appliances. I think that's a great thing to kind of put in there, as well as capacity for more charging. And I actually think that's it for now. Thank you.
May I respond
Sure.
to a couple of them? Just a couple of these, Ms. Friedlander. So for the green roof, we are looking at things like biophilic elements, around the property, including at the ground level. Agree about looking at the issue of height and breaking up the facades. We have been doing that. That's a refrain that we've heard. Humanizing Maple Avenue in particular. I think we've received a couple of letters of opposition or raising concerns, one of which said that it looks like a cube. So we want to make sure that that's not the case. We will look at the perspectives and the surrounding context. I agree. As far as the retail being challenged, when the Target shut down, that was a huge loss to my neighborhood, and it follows rooftops. I think the good news here, at least with independent living in particular, is that there are a lot of people with disposable income that will be living in this part of the city now. And, hopefully this will start creating a mass with the Reserve at Tinner Hill and Pearson Square together now that will be able to support retail and restaurants. You raise a really interesting issue about the ground floor space if we can't attract retail, or it goes dark for a number of months or even years. The Kensington has dealt with this at the ground floor with Famille being closed. And what do you do with that space? And that has been months of discussion with staff. I think that they're heading in the right direction, but they had an idea at one point to be able to use it for parties and weddings and graduation parties and retirement parties and things like that, but you couldn't because of the nature of the voluntary concession. Similarly, we did the Byron. Some of you all might recall the Byron special exception for where Acton Academy is. That was supposed to be used, just for retail, basically. When you so prescribe the voluntary concessions that it has to be this specific use, it really makes it difficult and involves staff time, commission time, and council time to go through the machinations again. I hadn't thought really up until tonight about using some of that space for ground floor community uses. It could be for tenants in the building. It could be for broader things. But I don't know, we may want to think about writing that in as a contingency with some design parameters, right? Like certain amount of glazing, having porosity. You don't want it to just be dead space where people are not able to go in and out. You want it to feed out onto that area. So we'll take a look at that, but that's an interesting point. The step backs, as I mentioned in the next reference corner, happy to look at that. We are looking at step backs and more on that. We are looking at the loading dock issue. The concept of driving through, so there's 2 drive-throughs between West Broad Street and West Annandale Road in the Harris Teeter building. There's an exclusive one for the loading dock, and there's an exclusive one for the Harris Teeter customers. We don't have enough space to do that because what we've tried to do is really shrink the footprint of the building to preserve the amount of open space. But it does connect between South Maple and South Washington Street. You don't have to turn around, it just drives on through. We will look at the commitments. The loading dock, we've looked at the different ways that we could access it. We think this is the best way to do it, but there will be, a loading dock coordinator. I know what you're saying about the doors being shut. I know, and being open half the time. You walk by and it smells like milk. We all know what that's like. That's not what we're after. And so we're looking at different things, including recessing it and minimizing and stuff like that. You raise a good point about the entry on South Washington Street. We have such a very small, just given the parcel configuration, it's a very small section on South Washington Street, but our architect will look at that as well. The bus stop. I may have mentioned this at the Boards and Commissions work session. We originally proposed a bus stop right at our site entrance. Staff has suggested we've got one right at Hillwood, 100 or so feet down. We don't need one right here. You don't have to stop here and then stop there. We fought for it because we wanted our residents to have it, but we ended up enrolling that into, or proposing that as a bike share contribution. The sewer shed issue is something, and I don't know if we want to talk about it tonight, but there have been meetings between the project team and city staff. Sanitary sewer is an issue that is regional in scope, that's become an issue, especially in the older areas of Northern Virginia. And the city, as I understand it, is not going to be able to rely on Fairfax County for its capacity long term. So the options are we do this study, which is what we originally proposed, and we look at it going downstream, and we enlarge it where necessary, or we find a way to pump it uphill, like up past the State Theater, and tap into Arlington County's system, which has lots of capacity. And so we're looking at both of those. If we keep it as we might write it as an either or, just to provide options in the voluntary concessions. But if it ends up going up to Arlington, then we wouldn't be doing the study. We would just construct the system. But everything from West Falls to, whatever project comes next, it's all going to have to be dealt with. So it's a good point. But we'll make sure that in our voluntary concessions, we address that. And if it is a sanitary sewer study, how far down we have to go, we'll put some teeth on that.
Thank you.
Okay, how about this side? Did I skip you earlier, Commissioner Comont?
Okay. Thank you for being here. I would just want to say, there's a lot to like about this project. You guys have already done a lot of the things that we always ask for. So thank you for thinking about many of those things. I do agree with a lot of the comments that my colleagues have made, particularly about the step backs on Maple and also facing the Henderson House. Also curious about the setback on Maple. I think staff has it at 15 feet. Is that right?
I can't remember what the step back is.
The
I know
setback.
Setback. The setback.
the setback, yeah.
I think it's-
Zoning ordinance is 14 feet. I think we're at 18 feet.
Yeah, it just, for a building of this height, I would say that 20 feels a little more appropriate. But 18 is pretty close. I had a question about, there was a staff comment about the Conceptual interior building plans indicate access to the ground floor commercial areas may only be from the interior parking garage. Is that the case?
No, I mean, there are access points, along the exterior of the building, and then there are back-of-house hallways that allow people to get from the parking garage to the lobby space and to those retail spaces.
But each of those retail spaces will have a door,
Exterior door.
exterior door that can be accessed. Okay, thank you. Wanted to talk about the plaza. I was curious about the materials that you're thinking about there. I'm just thinking about, many seniors spending time in the plaza. I know a number of seniors, they use walkers, so just thinking about those materials being really easy to navigate for people that maybe have some mobility issues. Also wondered, and I don't know, maybe this would make that harder, but if there are opportunities to have those be permeable. I feel like we end up with a lot of big projects that have a lot of open space, but so much of it is hardscaped. And it would really be nice to have a little bit more green space. I know that can be hard to maintain, so I just would encourage you to think about that. I just want to second my colleagues' comments about the perspectives. One of the perspectives made me laugh because it was basically like two big trees in the foreground with the building like hidden behind it, and it's just not helpful. So if we could just remove the giant trees in the picture, that would be really great. There's one that was a big offender, but I noticed that in a few of them, and some of the angles too, like the like bird's eye view. Like I want to see it how like a human being standing on the street would see it, not how a hawk would see it. Maybe there's reasons for those perspectives, but I have a hard time sometimes just understanding like what is this building really gonna look and feel like. So trying to deliver that would be helpful. I share a lot of the concerns about the location of the loading dock and the garage entry, and I don't, I'm sure you all have thought about this endlessly, but I don't know if there's any way to, where those transformers are, to like use that side of the building to facilitate access to the garage or the loading dock, just to kind of remove. It feels like so much of that Maple frontage is dedicated to either to vehicular access, whether that's trucks or cars, and I'd really rather maximize the retail in those areas, because that is a street where we really care about the pedestrian experience, and we really want to foster that, those neighborhood uses, commercial uses. So just as much as you can do to minimize the footprint of those two things on that side of the building, I would encourage you to do that, and if that means moving the transformers somewhere, I don't know. Obviously, I'm sure there are many practicalities to this that I do not understand. So, but that is my general feeling about it. The whole half the building is really dedicated to cars on that lower level, and that feels disappointing to me as somebody who would like to promote, or at least in the future have the availability of commercial space on the ground floor. Let's see. I had a question about the universal design. That was a recommendation, I think, that was made by staff. Is that something that you all are committing to? Terrific.
Yeah, I mean, we would have to have that as a part of pretty much every
Yeah,
unit.
great. Thank you. One thing I wanted to just mention is shade. You are going to have a really big open space, green space, and I really want to think about what we can do to make that attractive to people. I think one of the big things that you can do is make it comfortable when it's really hot. So there's so many cool creative things that people are doing with shade. There are artistic sculptures in some communities. So I just would encourage you to think about how we're shading that space. I love the trees. That's a big part of it, but there may be other techniques that we can use to, really make that a destination that people want to spend time in. On the South Washington frontage, I share the concern about the building being too far back. That is one feeling that I really did get from the perspectives that I saw is that the building is really far away from you, and I don't know what would draw me in as a pedestrian along South Washington. I have no practical suggestions for that, but I just see it as an issue. I have a question about the limits of the streetscape improvements that you're making. Is it just that one little section right in front of the entrance? Is that it on South Washington?
Right, so it's on the property that we control. So everything that is to the west of it has been improved as part of the Hillwood Avenue improvements. So we do not control the Atlantic, the Atlantic property here. And then along South Maple, it's our entire frontage.
Okay. So the little red strip on South Washington is okay.
So, yeah, that's right. So it's extending it to the next property down.
So maybe I have a question for staff then. I mean, that leaves just like a very small gap of streetscape that we would need to complete to hook it up to what's completed to the north already on South Washington. So is that something that is in the plans, is something that we might be able to do soon? I know we just did the area in front of Fox's. So it just strikes me as like it would be really nice to do all of that at once. I don't know if there's any possibility of that.
Yeah, there is a short section when the shopping center at the intersection of Washington and Annandale was redone within the last 10 years. That owner, at their own direction, actually updated the streetscape standards to something very similar to what the city uses. But you're right. Then there would be sort of a shopping center in between the two with a fairly narrow concrete sidewalk and then no street trees as well. I can take that back and think about sort of whether there's some ways to get that missing piece completed.
Okay, thank you. I just want to agree with Mr. Hyra and his comments about the best use of the funds that we might receive for this for affordable housing. It's very complicated. I do want to support our seniors who need affordable housing, but I agree that providing health care is really not maybe in the city's affordable housing goals. I would agree with him there. I think you are offering 15% conduit for EVs. I believe that the recommendation for that is 50%. So I know that may be impractical for some reasons, the energy that the building would need to be able to support that. But I would just encourage you to think more about what we can do to increase that goal. And I'm just curious, you all were here for our discussion about the Community Energy Action Plan and the different strategies that we're going to take. So, how are you feeling about this building that's going to be here for the next 50 to 70 years? Do you feel like the commitments that you're making for environmental improvements are going to be enough?
That might be a question. I mean, we have Sustainable Building Partners as our consultant on this, but Clint or Andy is our architect. I don't know if you all want to speak to that at all. I can tell you on the EV chargers, not to speak too out of school, but we have agreed internally to increase that to 50% for conduit.
Terrific. Thank you.
But this will be a LEED Gold certified building. We are targeting a minimum of 20% above code for energy efficiency. So we are feeling pretty good about it.
Thank you.
Oh, hey, Clint. Yeah, do you want to chime in? Clint Brackman with Architecture Incorporated is one of our project architects. Clint, do you want to say anything? You might be on mute. Still on mute. Yeah, well.
Okay.
He's saying something important.
Yeah.
They can't all be winners.
Thanks, Clint.
Okay. Okay. Just one last thing on parking. I think everybody knows maybe how I feel about parking, and we do need to be realistic about the need for parking in these buildings. But I do think the more you build, the more cars you're going to get, and so I support the reduction that you're requesting, and I would encourage you to see if you can maybe reduce even more in some areas. I do have questions about the parking provided for the residences. Some of those numbers seemed high to me, considering these are independent living and assisted living, but they were not for staff, right? Those were for the residents themselves.
So it's just overall, from a parking perspective, we're trying to thread the needle between those that want to have less parking and then a concern about the viability of the medical office and the retail, and those spaces getting eaten up by our residents. We had a very productive meeting with staff about a week and a half ago, where we brought in our traffic consultant. We also brought in our parking management consultant with Atlantic Parking to look at strategies to make sure, we have a 20.7% reduction between these three uses, the continuing care facility uses, medical office, and the retail and restaurant uses. They peak at different times. We think that we have right-sized this, what we're hoping to do is take another look at the amount of parking that's provided, make sure that make sure that the supply is correct for each of those uses, so that from a shared parking perspective, everything works, and then have as an attachment to the voluntary concessions, which is still a ways away, but a parking management plan similar to what Insight did at Broad and Washington, where you're looking at whether you need to have an on-site staff person, whether there's gates, whether there's a sticker program. How do you disincentivize people from having cars? So right now, with with our continuing care facility uses, we have 145 independent living units. We anticipate no more than one car per unit with each of those, with a sticker program, and they'd have to pay monthly fees and the like. So we're looking at where we're parking them. Are they on the ground floor? It's important also to make sure that from a tenant perspective, that our doctors, that our caregivers, that that those that would lease out space, that there's sufficient space for staff and for customers, because otherwise we will not be able to attract them. So we have no desire to build more parking than we need to. We want to make sure that the parking supply that we have is sufficient and that it's being managed properly. So more to come on that, but we think we're headed in the right direction. I don't know if we'd be able to reduce it further beyond what we have, but I also don't want to build any more than what we have. So.
Okay, that's helpful. Those sound like good goals. I'm surprised that you're expecting every unit of the independent living.
Independent living unit.
Understood, but still, I don't know. I'd be curious. You all work with these projects. Like, what does the Goodwin House have? How many of those independent living residents have cars? You could probably get this data from other similar kinds of projects, right? And look at what are those numbers? Because I think one per unit is a pretty high expectation, honestly. And then assisted living, there were a number of vehicles for those residents too. I feel like if you're in assisted living, you're probably not driving a car. I don't know. I was confused by some of those numbers.
Yeah, and Andrew, you might want to speak to this as well. This is not. We are anticipating no cars for any of the assisted living residents at all. It's how we paper it on, as far as the city's parking code and the number of caregivers and, our on-site staff people as well.
Well, that was what I was confused. So that one per unit it's baked in. It's residents and staff.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's all baked in. Yeah, it's an all-inclusive number. So that accounts for the visitors, staff, and all the residents that are on site.
Okay, maybe clarifying that.
And Maria or Ariel, are
calculations
you
would be
there by any
helpful.
chance? Would one of you all like to chime in on this, Ariel? So Ariel is with Grove Slade, who's our traffic consultant. So they help prepare the parking analysis and the shared parking and everything like that. So Ariel, are you following the conversation?
Yep, yeah, I'm here. So just to clarify, there's different numbers we can be talking about here. There are the city code requirements. And so the city code does require 1 space per 4 beds for independent living, assisted living, memory care, and then also 1 space per full-time staff member. So the city code does require parking for those assisted living memory care units. So those were added into what's required, but we really don't anticipate the assisted living or memory care residents owning a car. So there's that aspect. And then in terms of our shared parking analysis, we only assumed one car per 4 units because the city code only requires 1 per 4 beds.
Okay, okay. Thank you for the explanation. I think my colleague might have more questions on that, but yeah, appreciate it. Anyway, it's still lots of small things to work on, but generally it's I think it's a needed project in the city. I think we do need that a project like this. My grandmother went to Goodwin House because this did not exist in Falls Church City, and so I think that this is meeting a need that the community has going forward.
That's where my grandmother was too.
It's a nice community. This will be too.
Sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the applicant. I agree, there's a lot to like with this development. It's an area that does need some attention. It's a challenging site for all the reasons we already talked about. My big concern was less with the height than with the massing. We've covered all of that. I'm really glad to see that you're committed to addressing that, especially on the Maple Avenue part. Well, my colleagues have talked about that already, but that's my big concern so far going with this. So looking forward to what you're coming back with. I don't need to talk about the parking. I think we covered it there. Put it as much as you need to, but yeah, I'm fine with the reduction. With the VCs, you have a couple small things. You have a note in there that you're going to waive the rent for 10 years to the foundation, but if they can't come to an agreement, the deal's off. Maybe just include something from the foundation that they're willing to do this, that I didn't see any reference to that they're committed to doing this in there. I still don't understand this rooftop space, to be honest with you, at all. I don't get it. I'd rather see the street level activated than the roof. If there's maybe not a trade-off, but if there's a way that less attention can be paid to the roof space than to the street, I would support that. I just still don't get how that's a really useful public space. But willing to hear more about that. I just still don't understand that piece. I like some sense of how much $25,000 in public art buys. I don't know what that would look like. Agree with my colleagues on the affordable housing changes. Appreciate you put all the traffic impact studies and all that in there now. We usually get that at different stages, so I'm glad that that's in there now. And I really appreciate the pedestrian improvements on the site and everything you're doing there. But it's a very inhospitable area for anybody who's not in cars. I know you can only do what you can control with the properties you control, but for Founders Row 2, I know we spent a lot of time fixing West Street and some of the surrounding streets, big improvements that I think needed to be made there in order to make those sites more accessible by means other than the car. There's a lot of things in here that I just thought was confusing about this mid-block crossing on West Annandale. There's a West Annandale Road, South Maple intersection improvement project. I don't know what that is. There's a helpful map showing where there's no crosswalks now, which is very useful. Are those the places where you're proposing to upgrade the crosswalks? So just some more information about how, what kind of improvements are being made adjacent to the site in addition to what's on here right now. Appreciate all the attention to the electric vehicles. I still think we should do more to, again, get people out of their cars for this as well. A lot of everything else has been covered. Really appreciate the attention to the bike share station as opposed to the bus stop. I think will be useful. Thanks.
And thank you for these comments. I would just say, I have up on the screen the rooftop plan. So the building is, I think we talked about last time, it's not really a cube, it's kind of a U, a backward C, if you will. So the area where my cursor is here, that's actually on the third floor, and then it sort of wraps around. So really what's on the top level is the green roof area here, shown in sort of the brownish color, and then this rooftop area. So a comment or a question was earlier whether or not, from Ms. Friedlander, about whether it was going to be publicly accessible. And I think I nodded my head that it would be. So as of right now, it's going to be open as a rooftop amenity deck for the residents of the building, okay? That's sort of the starting point. What staff has asked us to take a look at, or didn't they ask to take a look at, they just planted the seed in our head, was taking a look at some of the rooftop spaces that you have in places like Charleston, Old Town, and now in Tysons, and see if there's a way to get some sort of public amenity space up there, maybe a small food truck or some sort of thing that could be affiliated with the restaurant on the ground floor or a totally independent operator. And the idea would be to have it look something that is similar to this. So we don't know yet how that's going to take shape, but it really is just on the top 10th floor roof. I'll also say, too, that it's not like we've spent time planning this at the expense of South Maple Avenue. The two are not really connected. They are exclusive, and I think we can do both. So hopefully what we come back with next month you'll be pleased with, but, for South Maple.
Okay. I have just a few comments to make, so this won't take long. Most of the comments that I hear are very positive for the project. The one issue that does kind of remain a sticking point for some folks is the height. Maybe it's because I grew up in Chicago, but tall buildings don't really cause a concern for me, but I know that it does for some others. I kind of tend to think that the voluntary concessions, which are significant for this, including $1.9 million for affordable housing and other amenities, that translates to at least to some degree into a 10-story building, and I think that's just an issue the city has to come to grips with. I'd like to see the open issues that Mrs. Arsenault talked about in her report resolved before we take a vote on our recommendation. They don't appear to be, extremely difficult situation, but I think it'd be nice to have all those cleaned up before we take our vote. Very pleased to hear about the 50% conduit, especially following our community energy action plan, where clearly the city is going to have to emphasize purchase and use of electric vehicles a lot more than we have in the past. As far as the parking, I don't have anything to add other than just to point out I think we shouldn't ignore what we have learned from the Kensington, where parking for staff and visitors might have been a little less than could be desired. I'm sure you'll be working that into your calculations. And I think that's all I had. So thank you very much for your presentation, for your comments. Any final comments, Mr. Stoddard, that you might want to make? I'll give you a chance for that before we close this out.
No, I thought this was a helpful work session in terms of sort of flagging those issues that the commissioners are looking for, both individually as well as a group. And I think there's good direction to the applicant to make some adjustments ahead of your scheduled public hearing.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much for presenting to us this evening. All right. I think we are ready to go, Mr. Stoddard, to your report. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. I forgot something here. We have our commissioner reports. Does anybody have a report that they'd like to share for the good of the cause? No? No? Anybody? I'll just say that I attended a very interesting lunch yesterday at the Chamber of Commerce where Mr. Stoddard made a presentation that got a very hearty round of applause. So I thought I would just acknowledge that. And if you are sending your presentation slides around, I think that might be something useful for the commissioners to get. Mr. Puentes is featured very prominently in a quote, so I'm sure he will be pleased to see that. Okay, so let's see. My screen is not working here, and I don't have the agenda. Let me see if there's planning commissioners reports, directors reports. So I guess it is your turn, Mr. Stoddard.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. There are a number of items in the director's report, but maybe before I jump into the director's report, because some of the items could be meaty. Instead, I'll talk about the look ahead here. Mr. Trainer, if you could go to the second page, thank you. All right, so we're on the meeting on the September 20th, so we pick up again, sort of bouncing back and forth between planning commission schedule and then council schedule for things that are related. Next Tuesday, council is scheduled to have its public hearing and final consideration of the T-zone zoning ordinance amendment, which you all had previously made a positive recommendation on. The staff report to be posted in the council report will describe sort of how the council responded to your all's recommendations as well as final items that they raised at their work session last Monday. October 2nd, we'll be kicking off a few long-range planning exercises. I think I've mentioned these before, but presentation on regional trends that are happening in demographics as a lead into updating the city's projections. Kicking off the bike plan update. That was mentioned as an action coming out of the draft action plan for energy. That's something we already had in the works, so glad to see folks getting interested in that. And then also talking through, again, these are things that I had presented to the commission previously, but I'll bring them back to you all. That is proposed zoning text cleanups. So these are intended to be largely administrative fixes where city code has fallen out of sync with state code, or maybe there are some old definitions that didn't get cleaned up as part of previous amendments. Looking ahead, October 18th, as I've mentioned twice tonight, becomes sort of a packed night for you all with a draft energy action plan before you for your recommendation to council as well as the Quinn application. I think we're probably going to have to look at this schedule. It looks like it's a little busy as it is right now, with Oak Park potentially coming back as well, although based on BZA scheduling, that may get bumped back. And then the rest of the items will take you through the end of the calendar year. As usual, I'll be distributing the service survey. I know in the first year we did that, we got some great responses, and we were able to really upgrade our services for the commission. And then since then, we've had somewhat of a declining participation. So I'm hoping I can sort of needle folks to get the responses in so that we can always be looking for ways to do a better job of supporting the commission. One thing that is not on your look ahead, but I did want to make you aware of, we have received an application, a by right application. It's a site plan application for the Stratford Motor Lodge site. It came in late Friday, so staff hasn't even completed its completeness review yet, but I did want to let you know that that's come in, and it looks like the concept of something of sort of a restaurant space, sort of a reuse of a portion of the building, a demo of a portion of the building, and then some sort of indoor-outdoor dining space. As a site plan, that'll come before you all for your work session as well as action, and we'll be getting that scheduled if there's room in October. Otherwise, we'll see how soon we can get it on the agenda for you all to look at. Before I jump into the director's report, City Manager Wyatt Shields is here, and I know he wanted a little bit of time to update you on things that are happening inside of City Hall.
Well,
welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, and I'll be brief tonight. I did want to just share with the Planning Commission some changes we'll be making to staffing, and Andy Young was here with you tonight, and Andy has been with the city for just over a year, as working on the government energy plan and the community energy plan. And I've asked Andy to take a new role with the city, to be a deputy city manager, who will be kind of my partner and working with Paul and with the entire CPEDS team and with our Department of Public Works to help those two departments deliver a really tremendous program that these two departments are working through right now. And that includes both the delivery of the private investment that's happening to ensure that that delivery happens in ways that is aligned with City Council and Planning Commission strategic objectives, and future development is as well. But we also are in an era where we have about $90 million of transportation grants that we'll be administering over the next 6 years. And it's very important that as we roll those projects out, that all of the good work that we do as a community and that Paul leads with our transportation planning, that expresses itself in what actually gets built in our community. And so Andy will be working as a deputy city manager with CPEDS and DPW to help facilitate and help coordinate that tremendous amount of work that's going forward in the community. So since Andy was before you tonight, I just wanted to mention that change. In addition to that, Jenny Carroll, our library director, I've asked her to take a deputy city manager role to work with me to help us move forward internal process improvements, to give staff the technology, the resources they need to be able to serve the public more effectively. And I think you feel that at the library with a lot of the innovation and growth that the staff have there. We have a lot of wonderful things happening here at City Hall as well. But we wanted to have Jenny kind of help all of our departments deploy technology to develop new systems and processes so that we can more efficiently and better serve the community. So those are the two changes that we are planning to move forward with next week. I think people won't feel the change immediately, but as these, as we have these additional pieces in place, I think we will accelerate and see some good progress, over the coming year. So I wanted to speak with you about that and be happy to answer any questions. It does have an impact on our CPEDS operations. I think it will be very positive. Really what we're trying to do is improve coordination and teamwork between CPEDS and DPW, two very important departments for delivering great things for our community. Happy to answer any questions.
Anybody?
All right. And
I think we're overwhelmed.
And so we'll get more information out this. I did want to let you all just hear it from me directly. And but I also want to just take the opportunity to thank Paul. I'd heard you talking about the chamber luncheon just this week, but Paul, Jack, our entire planning staff has just been doing tremendous work, I believe, and really challenging work, and really respect the approach that our staff take to really try to listen to the public, but also, follow the council's direction on the strategic objectives that we're trying to accomplish as a city. And that can be very complex work, but I just want to applaud our staff for what they've been doing. And I appreciate your support.
Sure. Well, thanks for stopping by to share that with us.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. So I can jump to the written report. Let's see, Mr. Trainer, if you've got that one handy. And I'll sort of follow these. I'll go a little bit from top to bottom and a little bit out of order. So one, we had a successful parking day this year. It was held last Friday. We have both the English and Vietnamese version flyers available in the attachments. We were able to, I thought this was really exciting. It was a quick follow-up on the East End Small Area Plan in terms of thinking about planning more public investment and more public events out at the Eden Center and throughout the East End generally. So we worked with Eden Center management as well as the Eden Center businesses, and we had a wonderful setup. Jenna Brummond, who's one of our new staff members here, she's helping run the neighborhood traffic calming program, running our residential permit parking along with Jeff Sykes. She's also our CACT staff liaison. She was the lead on organizing this year's parking day. So we had new plants, and we've partnered with the arborist on the plant selection, and he'll be able to use those in plantings throughout the city. And we were able to, Jenna was able to run the event with traditionally Vietnamese games played in chalk on various parking parking spaces, which is the whole point, of course, of parking day, to reuse parking spaces and thinking about them as places for human activity, not just vehicle storage. And so really being able to dress up a space and making a positive sort of impact with a sort of a splashy event. The next two items are a little bit longer, so I'll say what they are, and then maybe I'll look to you all for some direction on how much you want to spend on them. But first was a 5-year outlook for the City of Falls Church. And this was a presentation that was provided to, it was done last year, and last year we were able to present to the Chamber of Commerce as well as the League of Women Voters. I presented to the Chamber yesterday, and I'm working with the League to find a date that can work. They've got, as you might imagine, they've got a busy meeting schedule coming up with the November election. But the 5-year outlook looks at planning guidance in the city and then how the development that's upcoming sort of fits within that planning guidance, and then what are the connections being made between them, right? So that developments don't always seem like they're coming up sort of one at a time or ad hoc, or it's just sort of build anywhere. There is actually planning guidance from the comprehensive plan, the small area plans, and that these systems like transportation are also being designed in a way to support the ongoing private activity. Small area plan retrospective. So the city now has adopted small area plans for all of its planning opportunity areas. And so this is a document pulled together by some of our long-range planners. And I should give credit. Zoe LaRive was the author of this year's 5-year outlook slides. I don't want to forget to give her credit. The small area plan retrospective was pulled together by two of our senior planners, Emily Bazemore and Cameron Garris, who are also the leads on the East End small area plan. But it looks back at all of the city small area plans that we now have on the books and highlights some basic information about each area, some basic takeaways from each plan, and then the actions that have followed from that planning guidance. Let's go down to the next one. This is part of keeping you all informed. You had asked for this, and I think it was a good ask, and so I'm trying to deliver on it. You all had been asked to be kept informed as grant applications are going through the process. Carrie Odnino recently prepared grant applications for a signal prioritization project. This was submitted to the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. And this is a follow-up to the smart signals technology that's being done at the West End, and it also lays the groundwork for transit priority that could be used by the future BRT, the bus rapid transit system. We also applied for Cavalier Trail pedestrian improvements. So most folks, hopefully folks are aware, Cavalier Trail Park connects at the south end on South Maple, and then it sort of moves its way north and gets kind of close, but not all the way there, to Oak Street Elementary. And these improvements are really part of a larger plan, and it's actually in the attachments. If you look at it, you can sort of start to see the pieces when you look at satellite imagery, but there is a sort of a disconnected network of green spaces that gets you all the way from Cavalier Trail at Maple and Washington all the way up to the WNOD at the crossing with West Broad next to Founders Road 2. And so the idea is to have a plan in place. We had support from Tool Design in preparing that study, and then over time try to connect those pieces so that you have a connected greenway getting you all the way across the city. So we'll keep pursuing those sorts of sort of ped bike and sort of greenways grants as we can. Last item, also courtesy of Carrie Odnino. This is a summary of the Seven Corners phasing study with Fairfax DOT recently released. They released their final study. We have a link to it here in the report. I think we have some graphics. Actually, if we scroll down to the graphics, I'm not going to walk through them in detail, but I just want to show that they are there, that the idea is that this ring road gets completed. This is the sort of Seven Corners intersection. 50 is moving from sort of the middle of the left side of the screen across to the right. Route 7 is sort of diagonal from the lower right corner to the upper middle of the screen, and then the green portions are, of course, the new pieces that are going in. So they have a standard cross-section in terms of number of travel lanes, with as well as dedicated bicycle facilities and pedestrian facilities. And so they would complete this in phases according to their study. First, this sort of these two segments on the south connecting 50 to Route 7, or over Route 50 rather. If we scroll down to the next map, and then completing that connection going all the way across 50 with a new bridge, stopping at the edge of the shopping center there in Fairfax County, and then scroll down again. Building in more of the facilities and the bridges, and redoing the intersection. This would take, ultimately, this takes 7 and Wilson and the on and off ramps to 50 into a 4-legged intersection. That's what's shown in the upper portion of that screen. And then the other sort of intersections are sort of moved off to other pieces of the roadway. And then this is sort of this would be the final stage of the plan, but here Fairfax DOT would work with the property owners in Fairfax County to extend the roadway actually through the existing shopping center as well as some of the garden apartments and connect in at Roosevelt Boulevard in Wilson, making a 4-legged intersection there. The city council and city staff had been pretty consistent in some comments we'd made throughout the phasing study. Mr. Trainer, if you're able to go to the top of this section. And Mr. Odonino did a nice job of summarizing sort of what are the implications. But one, the ring road, as you may remember, earlier versions actually showed it extending sort of out into the city. We were pretty clear early on that wasn't our vision for transportation in the area. And so the ring road is designed to stay within Fairfax County. They have been working with us on the design, especially on the bike facilities and ensuring that there is connectivity. They're looking at potential, they did have sort of parklet gateways there at the 4-legged intersection with 7 and Wilson to provide an entryway into the city. And all the bridges are being designed to accommodate future truck traffic, both in terms of loading as well as height, which is an issue with the current bridges. Some things that we're continuing to work with them on. There are some crosswalks that we had suggested be included, and they're not shown in the phasing study. Hillwood Avenue, they have designed the roadway in a way that actually breaks that connection between Hillwood and Seven Corners, so that should reduce sort of the ease of cut-through traffic along Hillwood Avenue. And just looking for some neighborhood-specific outreach to be conducted. And then in terms of, it's sort of funny to put this in a transportation sort of comment letter, but we thought it made sense. We have some concerns about making sure that area where the interchange is can remain sort of a vibrant, sort of pedestrian scale environment. If you think about the Route 7 and 66 interchange next to the West End, there's a lot of big ramps, a lot of sort of grass, but not a lot of activity and a lot of narrow sidewalks. And so one of the things we've been saying regularly is make sure that parcel access is designed and that the parcels that survive within those sort of new roadways are of a developable size and shape and scale. And I think that's, laying that groundwork is important to making sure that we don't end up with essentially a dead space between sort of a vibrant West End and a vibrant Seven Corners, and you can't get from one to the other. So anyway, that's a rundown on that, and more materials are available in the report. And then, Mr. Chair, maybe I'll look to you for direction on to what extent you want me to walk through the presentations, whether it's the 5-year outlook and or the small area plan retrospective.
Well, let me look to my colleagues as far as.
I think we can read the presentation.
Am I sensing a desire to make use of our quiet time to take a look at these and absorb them at our own pace?
Sure. You know what? Maybe if you'll allow it, I think the whole presentation takes about 20 minutes, but I'm seeing a lot of head shakes on that. But if you'll allow me to maybe.
It's a beautiful presentation. We're very familiar with the city. We will read it.
Very
and,
well.
We will ask questions. At
The
the next meeting, we'll come with a list of questions if we have them.
Well, I do want you all to take pride, right? I mean, in the sense that sort of these two documents go together, right? That it has long been the Planning Commission that has been the steering committee for these small area plans. So you all should feel very proud of that tradition and the work you're even continuing to do, beginning with the North Washington Plan being adopted in 2011 to the West End or to the East End here in 2023. And right, really this idea of what is the demand for people who want to live in this great place, and then what's all the infrastructure that you need to have in place to make that happen. And so both of these documents touch on those two key points about what is the next generation looking for, how do you celebrate past generations and accommodating the next generation as well. It gets to some of the basic definitions of sustainability, and you all sort of make that happen through your planning documents and then the projects you review and the CIP that you help prepare every year.
Yeah, I think it's so successful on the 8 plans that probably a number of them are already in need of renovation and updating. But no, I'm sure there's a lot to congratulate yourself for, to have completed that series of plans. So, any comments from folks?
I just want to say thank you to you and staff, and Ms. Bazemore and Ms. LaRive for creating these. They're really helpful summaries of the small area plans and the outlook for the city. So I think this 5-year outlook presentation was the one that you gave that received such good feedback, right? So it's really nice to be able to kind of take a step back, because I think we can get mired in all of these individual little projects and these different decisions that we're making, or even like one small area plan, one part of the city. And so it's really nice to have this more holistic look at the work of the Planning Commission and the Planning Department, and all of the many things that are happening in the city. I just had one comment, and that is about parking day. I missed it. I didn't even know it was happening. So I don't know if it was like was it last minute, or I just missed it. I don't know. But if we can like get the word out about parking day, I mean, I feel like I should have at least heard about it. I would have loved to go.
Yeah, we can do a better job of advertising.
Okay,
there.
thanks.
Yep. The one graphic, if you'll allow, there is one graphic I want to put up, because it is pretty remarkable in terms of city development. It's just slide 9, the
All right, show us
5-year
the
outlook.
He's so proud of this graphic.
It's well, I didn't put it together, but it's a pretty remarkable story. I mean, here we are talking about sort of decreasing travel, sort of increasing travel demand, but decreasing auto usage, and it's slide 9. And it's, for a long time in city planning, they've talked about sort of how do you design for walkable neighborhoods, and that's really what the planning opportunity areas are about, and the small area plans. And when you go back to, for the Giant has existed since 1961, but the next major grocery store didn't get built until 2014. And so when you look at the growth of the grocery stores, and reuse grocery stores because those are a signal of other things that you need to access every day, right? The dry cleaner co-locates, the restaurants co-locate. So when you have a grocery near you, that means you probably have other things near you as well. So you have the Giant in 1961, and you think about it, you want to get groceries in the city anytime between 1961 and 2014. That meant you were either going to, I guess it was a Shoppers Food Warehouse in Seven Corners, or you're going to the Safeway down 29, or you're going out to the Giant on the far west end of the city. And suddenly you have options that don't mean, maybe you get in your car, but if you do, you're driving half as far as you used to. Or maybe there's another way for you to get there. And it's the 2005 comprehensive plan that identifies the POAs. The city starts planning for these things, encouraging reinvestment in these commercial properties, and suddenly the good fortune shows up in 2014 in the East End, 2016 Harris Teeter, 2019 Aldi, and at the same time, more housing development is being approved within these commercial areas within proximity to these grocery stores. And so today, 70% of the city's homes are within a 10-minute walk of a grocery store, and I think that's just sort of a remarkable turn over a fairly short period of sort of where the city was in terms of walkability, and a lot of it is so much of your transportation is actually transportation planning is actually land use planning, and you can sort of see it captured in some of the charts and the numbers on the slide. So that's a new one, so I wanted to make sure I had a chance to share it with you. Thank you.
Any comments? I think you have overwhelmed us here.
No, it's excellent. I mean, honestly, Paul, we're teasing you, but it's actually, it is impressive. And for anyone who thinks that, as a small jurisdiction that we're not able to do a lot, I mean, this obviously, shows how much we actually do get done, which is quite remarkable. Little projects, larger things. I mean, and the amount of planning work you guys are doing. I mean, someone who, been doing a little bit of that myself over the years. I mean, the amount of stuff you guys do with a small staff is very impressive.
And I think it's satisfying that it shows up in the survey,
Right,
right? That was at the top of the list, was walkability, so.
And you leverage grant funding and other things, and you work with what you have in-house, and, you guys are, again, you have a lot on your plate, and, it's amazing what you guys are able to accomplish, and so, no, it's great, and it is good. Every once in a while, it's good to pat ourselves on the back and promote the positive things. We hear a lot of negative stuff at a lot of these meetings, but it's good once in a while to go out and show all the positive things we've done here. And, I mean, it's hard to get a lot of people to agree on things in the town these days, but certainly, that some of these big changes have been for the better. Things like this and other things, just improving the quality of life for people. So, yeah, it's great. No, it's great, Paul. I tease you sometimes, but this is really good.
I can take it. Thank you.
Okay, any final comments before we close out our work for the night? Seeing none, I think we can call our meeting adjourned.